Hey, it's me, the guy who uploads weekly. Before this video begins, I would like to thank you guys for 150 subscribers. You guys are honestly insane. Seriously, thank you guys so much for the support. It's really quite overwhelming, I would say. It really means a lot. It encourages me to make more videos. And trust me, I have a lot of projects on mind. Some of them are being on the works, like for example, Spectre Tenebria's Hero History and stuff like that. So yeah, hopefully you stick around and keep supporting the channel, stuff like that. I'm pretty bad at this. Anyways, today we are doing a tier list for this season's RTA Season 4. Now before I begin, this tier list is heavily based upon my opinion and experience. And with that out of the way, let's dive straight into this season's RTA tier list. Alright, this is actually my first time doing a tier list. Credits to this guy, by the way. I think this is pretty updated. Yeah, credits to this guy. Really cool tier list he got here. First up, let's start with Arcadies. Is this alphabetical order? Yeah, I think it is, looking at it. So first up we have Arcadies. I feel like she's okay. She isn't really a huge priority pick in this when it comes to Soul Weavers. The top Soul Weavers right now are Diane, Maid Chloe, and Wall of Light. Diane and Maid, they both offer protection to your team while also giving attack buff, which is really huge this season. And Ruel, I mean, Ruel is Ruel, you know, one of the best Soul Weavers in the game. Arcadies, I don't think Arcadies holds a light compared to these Soul Weavers that I've mentioned, but she's still pretty good. I can still see some certain scenarios that Arcadies will shine, like from a bruiser matchup. I feel like Arcadies is pretty good. So with that, I think B tier? B or C? I'm kind of conflicted if B or C. I feel like B. B gives her justice, yeah? This guy, Adley. Yeah, this guy's name's Ad. I feel I've seen this guy back on season 3 before Politics, when like Faithless Ludica is still really quite popular among cleavers. But this season he isn't. I don't see him that much. Even when you're up against a cleaver, there's a lot more options against cleave other than Adley. And since Faithless Ludica kind of fell out of the meta, that means Adley's usage just drops. So with that, I think a solid C tier. He has a niche, and he's pretty good at that niche. That's what I would like to say. Next up is Adventurer Roth. Now, Adventurer Ross was quite solid on season 3. He was also one of the good knights out there. I mean, Adventurer Ross has a really solid kit. I feel like he's one of the best 3 stars in the game. Also, arguably one of the better knights out there. But with that, I think a solid A tier. Yeah, solid A tier for our main character. He's really good, actually. Like, really good. I wish I could build mine someday. In this meta, I think he's kind of fallen out of flavor. Like, Crow became more of a very common and strong pick. Fallen City fell off a bit, but she's still pretty strong. Last Rider Crow, or the Golden Boys in general, like A Tywin and Crow, kind of fell off a bit, but they're still really strong. And Adventurer Ross isn't that much favored of a knight these days, but he's still pretty strong in this meta. Especially paired with Spectre Tenebria, one of the best DPS in this game at the moment. So yeah. Next up, is this Anos or Sonia? I don't actually know. I kind of feel bad. I'm too lazy at the moment to research her name, but I don't see her. I don't even know what her kit does, so D tier. This guy, what is this guy's name again? Oh yeah, Budget MLCan. Yeah, D tier. Aether. Next up is Alencia. How the mighty have fallen indeed. She used to be a really popular pick back in season 2. These days she's pretty rare, but she's still pretty good, I would say. In this meta full of Soul Weavers like Diane and Maid, and even Crow, they provide buffs onto her team. Alencia, with her S3, she strips those buffs. Of course you can't strip the high effect resist made Chloe's and stuff, but she does strip some of the DPS units in the game. Like, she has a chance to strip Carrot, she can strip Spectre Tenebria, RB, and stuff like that. So I think she's quite solid. She still has a strong kit, without a doubt. And with that, I think a solid B tier. I think she's a solid B tier. Arguably A or B, but I feel like based from the presence that she gives right now, I think B is justified, in my opinion, at the very least. Next up, Alexa, one of the best Wyvern units in the game, just behind Sigrid. Obviously, Sigrid is the queen of the Wyvern, so yeah. RTA-wise, she isn't played. Wanda used to have a niche when she first debuted. As her specialty changed, she used to see some play for Remnant Violets back in Season 3, from what I recall. So, but nowadays, there are better Rylot answers out there. Rylot himself isn't even picked that much anymore compared to what he used to be. So, a solid D tier. Yeah, Wanda is D tier, unfortunately. Next up is Ambition Cywin. Kind of unfortunate that he fell out of flavor. He's one of the knights that I really like to use because of his sheer utility. I build him just pure effectiveness, pure bulky stats and effectiveness. I personally build him that way since I don't have a lot of great bruiserish DPS gears. So I feel like A Tywin is still solid. Still a solid unit in the game. Like, no one does what he does. He's just really overloaded in terms of his kit, and is just really strong. And I feel like just like RB, he can like pretty much adapt to the meta. He's still a solid unit. Not a lot of people can counter this guy, so I think a solid S tier. He deserves it, honestly. Ambition Tywin deserves it. He's just really strong. There's nothing much else to say about him. Next up, we have Angelic Montmorency. I feel like she's in the same category as Arcadies. There are a lot of cleanser nowadays, like Designer Lilibet, Desert Jewel Bazaar, even made Chloe is a reliable cleanser. Angelic Momo, she still has a niche. Like, if you don't have the units that I've mentioned, A Momo is a really good choice. She's still one of the best Soul Weavers, very free to play unit. I feel like B tier. She's a solid B tier in my opinion. Next up is Sinful Angelica. In this meta filled with made Chloes, I feel like Sinful Angelica is really good. I've been picking her against made Chloes, and she's been seeing a lot of good success. She provides attack buff and speed buff, which is really nice, and the pseudo extinction mechanic that she has on her S2 is really nice against made Chloe. So I think a solid A tier for Sinful Angelica. She's really good right now in this meta because of the Soul Weavers popping back, like made Chloe, like I've mentioned, and Rival of Light. She's really strong. Don't underestimate her, she's absolutely strong. Next up is Angelica. Unfortunately, there's not really much any justification for using her, so I think D tier is a solid choice. Next up is Apocalypse Ravi. It's unfortunate. Before, she used to be the better Ravi. Like, back in the day, she used to be the better Ravi overall. But now that the meta has changed, Fire Ravi became more oppressive into the meta since she had very good sustain, and the fact that she works with Sigurd really well. But nowadays, even Fire Ravi fell out of the meta. I think the thing that hurts Apocalypse Ravi from being good is the Frenzy mechanic. Because the Frenzy mechanic decreases the HP, and Apocalypse Ravi scales on her HP percent. So when her HP percent goes down, her damage just falls off. And unlike Last Rider Crow or Ambitious Tywin, she doesn't really provide that much to the team. She doesn't ignore defense like Last Rider Crow does. She doesn't give very toxic debuffs onto the enemy team like stuns and slows like A Tywin does. She suffers greatly. When the frenzy changes kicked in, she fell off really hard. So with that said, I think she's good. She's still good nonetheless in my opinion. With that, I think A Ravi is a solid B tier. She's still alright. Just alright. Next up, Aramenta. Just use Carrot. Archdemon Mercedes. This unit is so annoying to face against. Like, when she pops off, she pops off. And when she does, it's just so annoying to face. Her seal mechanic is really strong. I feel like she's very future-proof in terms of the RTA meta. She's going to become more and more stronger as units come and go. So in this meta, I feel like her usage will rise up more if she counters Researcher Carrot. At the moment, she doesn't counter Researcher Carrot because Carrot can cleanse herself. just like a Tywin. And Seal doesn't work on Carrot because that isn't her passive herself. I feel like Archdemon Shadow is still really strong, even though she doesn't 100% counter Carrot. But still, with that, I feel like a solid A tier. Next up is Armin. Now, Armin, I don't really know 100% what her kit does, but since she isn't really being played, and I don't really see that much of a niche for her, so I feel like D tier is justified. ROL, budget FCC. Our assassin Cartuja, he has a niche. That's all I have to say. He's okay, I guess. He has a niche. If you like to gamble, then props to you, but he doesn't really provide that much to the team. Only the 15% evasion. Even then, it's not that good of a mechanic overall. He provides 15% evasion to the team, but since Symbol of Unity is really popular, and it's quite unpredictable where people put their Symbol of Unity on, so he's okay. Assassin Cartuja is okay. He's a good niche. That's pretty much about it. Next up is Assassin Sid, one of the units out there that can shut down Cleave really hard, but fell out of flavor recently when Guiding Light came into the picture, but he's still really strong. The fact that he can steal souls just from his S3 is really huge, and the damage output he gives is really strong, so I feel like a solid A tier for Assassin Sid. Next up is Saturn Coley. Now when paired up with a mage that's holding Toggle, she can pretty much blow up a bruiser unit. I feel like I'll put her at the same rank as Assassin Sid. They're both really strong units. I feel like these two are solid A tier. Next up is Oxlot. Now Oxlot in itself is a really strong unit. He can hold Tagahals and give your DPS attack buff and 100% combat readiness. If he does his S2 on a unit like Arbiter Bildred or Judge Kisei, then the enemy team is pretty much screwed. But in today's meta, I feel like since Cleave has kind of fallen off a little bit, and Oxlot isn't really used that much in Cleave anymore, I feel like he's a solid B tier. Next up is Azalea, from what I remember. I don't know what she does, unfortunately, so I feel like D tier. Next is Balzan. He's a good green expedition unit, that's pretty much about it. Next up is Biken. Now, there's another Biken build other than one-shot Banshee, which is like the speedy opener Biken. I feel like I've faced a couple of them on RTA before, but in this season, nah, she's just a good Banshee unit, that's about it. Next up is Basar, and without a doubt, I would place him up on S tier. He's a really strong unit in today's meta. No one does what he does. AoE pushback, strip, and applying unbuffable, while ignoring effect resist. That in itself is really huge and very valuable, especially in today's meta full of buffs and Soul Weaver. Although he doesn't 100% counter Maid Chloe nowadays, I feel like the fact that his presence could scare off a Maid Chloe user is still really valuable. So with that, I feel like S tier is justified for this monstrous unit. Next up is Basque. I don't really see Basque that much, so I'll put up a D tier. Next up is Batiste. He has a good niche on Wyvern 13. That's pretty much about it. Next up is Watcher Shuri. Without a doubt, he's A tier. The reason for this is because he has a speed imprint, and that in itself is really valuable, while having a very good kit. So yeah, A tier. Next up is Broman. He kind of fell off recently on today's meta, so I feel like C tier. There are just better strippers out there, and he isn't really reliable, I would like to say. He isn't the best stripper in the world. He also isn't the best debuffer in the world. While although silence could be really huge, it just doesn't compare to someone like Basar or maybe Cerise, or maybe even Fairytale Tenebria. Next up is Bloodblade Karen. Bloodblade Karen is a solid cleaver, I would say. Nowadays, cleave isn't that popular. Although she has a counter set variation, I feel like RB just does what she does better. So with that, I feel like C tiers is justifiable. Next up is Blood Moon Haze, and without a doubt, I would put him at S tier. A really strong unit. I wish I have him, but I don't. He's really strong in today's meta. He counters RB, he counters Maid Chloe. Even without those two on the board, the fact that he has true damage in his kit while providing healing on his team is actually really huge. He's just overall a really great unit. Wish I had him. He's very strong, without a doubt. Next up is MLKen, and we know MLKen is just in the gutter right now. Arguably one of the worst ML5s out there. So I feel like a solid C tier. We all know what MLKen does. We all know how great he used to be back in the day, but nowadays he's just fallen off. The fact that LQC exists and the fact that there are a lot of control units out there just makes this guy really irrelevant, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is at the end of the day. Next up is Briar Witch Iseria. Now, Briar Witch Iseria has fallen off, in my opinion, but she's still a really solid unit. I feel like her value has gotten down ever since the Maid Chloe buff. The fact that Maid Chloe can now cleanse 2 of her debuffs, like Attack Down and Unbuffable, is really, really huge. So I feel like Briar Witch Iseria is still strong, in my opinion, but she's quite fallen off, I would say. So yeah, this guy, not that good. I think I'm going to put the specialty change version in here as well. So yeah, Captain Rigorous, although they buffed him, he's still really mediocre. Carmine Rose, D tier. Next up is Carrot. Now this Carrot is D tier, but this Carrot, this unit single-handedly shifted the meta, and that is insane. I think we can all agree that Carrot has a really, really strong and oppressive kit. She's really overloaded. She can cleanse, she applies burns whenever she gets touched, she strips with her S3, she gets an extra turn for detonation on her S1. Her S1 also applies speed down, which is a really, really big debuff. She's just overall a really, really strong unit. She has solid protection. She's very self-sufficient because she has her own protection in her kit in form of the barriers, continuous healing on her S3, and the fact that she takes less damage because of her innate damage reduction on her S2. Carrot, we can all agree she's really broken. She's really, really good in today's meta. Very meta warping, I would say. So yeah, deservedly S tier. Next up is Cartuja, and he's garbage. Iseria. Now there are people out there that are trying to make her work on the RTA setting, but as of right now, she hasn't seen that much success. But I feel like her kit just screams future-proof. So when the time comes, I feel like she's going to be a strong unit in the future. But as of right now, she's pretty niche. That's about it. Next up is Far Cecilia. I feel like a certain someone will give her S tier without a doubt. But in my opinion, the other knights, especially the popular one these days, kind of outshadow her or outperform her. So with that, I feel like a solid B tier for Far Cecilia. If someone could make her work at the highest level, then I feel like she's a strong unit, you know? So I feel like she deserves B tier at the very least. Next up is Celeste. The fact that she has a speed imprint, she deserves A tier, without a doubt. And the fact that she also has a really solid kit backing that up, it's really good. So she deserves A tier. Next up, Celestial Mercedes. She's pretty bad. Even as a cleaver, she's really bad. Even BBK outperforms her as a cleaver, so that's telling something. Next up is Celine. I feel like Politis these days just outshine her. Celine isn't that good anymore. Politis just does Celine's job, but a bit better, in my opinion. I mean, sure, Celine could kill someone right off the bat, but Politis can kill and has the potential to lap them and provide debuffs to the rest of the team. That in itself is really huge for Politis, so with that in mind, I feel like Celine deserves C tier. She's niche, but not that good in her niche. Next up is Cerise. Now, Cerise can shut down General Purgus, and General Purgus is still pretty strong today, and General Purgus in itself just gives a lot of value to the team. So I feel like Cerise, she may have fallen off, but she's still a very solid unit. So I feel like A tier. She deserves A tier. I feel like these days, Fairytale Tenebria just kind of outshadows her, or outperforms her. Next up is Sermia. I've seen some people try counter Sermia, and they're trying to make that work, but at the moment, I feel like she's just not there. She's not at the power level of some of these units, not at the very least. Sedum is one of the core ingredients, I would say, when it comes to cleave. Sedum is just really good at enabling cleave, and the fact that she could nuke down a target with her hard-hitting Soulburn S1 is just really huge, so I feel like A tier. She deserves A tier. She's still really strong, even with some counters on the field. She's still a really strong unit. She could still take like a 50-50 gamble without doing her S3 versus Politis or even Celine on the board. So yeah, very strong unit, still a very strong unit. One of the units that enables cleave very, very much. So yeah. Next up is Axe God. Now, Axe God got the short end of the stick when it comes to the balance adjustments. Maid Chloe and Carrot were the real winner on that balance patch. Axe God just got shafted. I mean, he's pretty niche. That's about it. I don't see him that. I haven't even seen him ever since his buff. So yeah, he's okay, I would say. I've seen Pan Shui try to make him work, but At the moment, I'm not kind of convinced yet. He's still pretty niche, I would say. So yeah, C tier. I think he deserves C tier at the very least. Next up is Charles. Charles is C tier. He's very inconsistent, but when he pops off, he pops off. But that is very conditional, and it's up to you whether you like RNG or not. I mean, sure, him proccing counter is really fun to see. Proccing counter and S2 at the very same time. It's pretty satisfying to see, and it's quite annoying when it happens on your perspective, when you were the enemy, when you're against Charles. So yeah, C tier, still a pretty good unit, just fallen out of flavor, which is unfortunate. Next up is Arbiter Bildred. Let's just get it out of the way. Still a strong unit. You know what he does? I know what he does. We've all heard the approaching ruin. We've all heard the 40% chance. We've all seen the 40% chance happening against us. So yeah, there's nothing much else to say. S tier unit, very meta warping in my opinion. I already gave out a lot of in-depth analysis for this guy. I'm not willing to go through them again. Yeah, next up is Fire Charlotte. I feel like she's a good unit, especially with Spectre Tenebria being really popular. And the fact that she could apply attack down or attack debuff is really strong even against Carrot. So I feel like she's a solid B tier. She isn't really played as much at the moment. Maybe it's because the meta recently kind of just shifted from the Golden Boy meta to now Carrot meta, Carrot and Crow meta. So yeah, I feel like Charlotte is good, has a very good niche, solid B tier. She could counter a lot of the popular units out there like Landy, Spectre Tenebria, and even Carrot because the fact that she applies attack down again. Next up is Chloe. Now, if Kurai is watching this, there. But from other players' perspective, there we go. Next up is Shu. Who even drafts Shu? Since Fire Ravi fell out of flavor, that means Shu's usage just dropped. She's just landy food. So yeah, Shu, D tier. I mean, I think it's unfair to give her D tier, so I guess C tier. Since she has solid niche when, you know, Fire Ravi may be really relevant right now on the lower end of the meta. This guy, since we already reviewed him, this version is D tier. Next up is Sid, A tier. He has a speed imprint while having a really good kit. Next up is Clarissa, very good Wyvern Hunter. Next up, Ice Coley. Who? Next up is Fire Maya. While I do love to use her here and there when the situation is right, but in today's meta, she's just not really good. The fact that she can't Elbris, Spectre Tenebria, and even a Landy just kind of hinders her quite a lot. So I feel like C tier. She has a good niche. That's pretty much about it. She's a fun unit to use, very fun unit to use, but unfortunate that her kit gets countered by the popular units. Next up, Commander Lorena, one of the best single target DPS in the game. A good PvE unit overall. Next up, Fire Corvus, revert the nerfs, that's about it. ML Rin, I feel like ML Rin in terms of speed contesting is a really solid unit. So I feel like A tier. The fact that she's one of the fastest units in the game behind Kayron. The fact that she could steal immunity. The fact that she could give immunity to her team. Stunning a very threatening target and being able to hold RNL. She's a really good unit. Overall A tier. She deserves A tier. Next up is Crimson Armin. Just like Fire Cecilia, other knights outshine. So, but she has a good niche, I guess. She got buffed recently to have damage reduction on her S2 instead of being reduction from crit damages. So yeah, I feel like solid C tier for Crimson Armin. Crozet, fodder for Troublemaker. A solid Wyvern tank though. Next up, Dark Corvus. I feel like in this meta, which is really fast-paced and very buff-reliant, I feel like Dark Harvest isn't that hot. He's still good. I mean, Dark Harvest is still Dark Harvest. I mean, when the situation is right, he could delete pretty much anyone on the field except for, you know, T-Serin. I feel like Dark Corvus is a solid B tier. He has a niche, very good at that niche, very threatening as a 5th pick when the enemy doesn't have very huge single target DPS and stuff, so yeah. Next up, that's our Jewel Bazaar. I really like this unit. He's a very strong unit, very good unit in the right scenario. Arguably one of the best cleansers in the game. But since Cursed Compass is being really popular at the moment, and the fact that Fairytale Tenebria is also quite popular, and is an avid user of Cursed Compass, But overall, I feel like Desert Jewel Bazaar deserves A tier. He just does so much. No other unit can do what he do. And the fact that he can't explode nowadays. He could negate Bazaar, he could negate Ambitious Tywin, he could even negate Carrot, but carrots are usually built slow. Next up is Design a little bit. Now, what I think, she's a solid cleanser unit, but that's about it. She's a solid cleanser unit. And she's kind of inconsistent in a way, because players can play around her rage bar. So yeah, if this was a waifu tier list, I'd put her at S. But since it's an RTA tier list, I feel like she has a good niche. She does okay damage, so I feel like B tier or even C tier. I'm kind of undecided. I feel like B tier, yes. This cares off a lot of people, a lot of control players out there. So she's really good, just not that good. Solid unit though. Next up is Destina. Destina as a cleanser unit is really good. You can build her up to like 250 effect resist. She's kind of slow, but it's okay. She could hold Water's Origin, which could boost up her combat readiness. I'd give her an A tier. She pretty much does the same job as Bazaar. She also has a really strong healings on her S2 and S3, so yeah. She's really good, strong unit. Her EE is also strong. She also has a variety of builds like the counter set and speed set, counter cleansing set. The counter set usually gives her the cleanse EE whenever she auto attacks. Overall, a solid unit, Destina. Next up is Diane. This unit is very infamous for rising and dropping in the meta. I feel like Diane, arguably, I'd put her at S tier. The fact that she works really well with Carrot and even Spectre Tenebria is really huge. She's one of the premier Soul Weaver right now at the meta, alongside with Maid Chloe, so yeah. I feel like Diane deserves S tier. She's a really strong unit. There's also a lot of variety when it comes to her builds. Like she could be like 220 speed, very tanky, and have very high-ish effect resist. There are like 240 to 250 ones who just give buffs. There are the counter DNs with Celestine with high effect resist. So yeah, DN is DN at the end of the day. She's a really good unit, provides attack buff and anti-crit. Very synergizes really well with the meta units being Landy, Carrot, and Spectre Tenebria. Next up is Dingo. D tier for Dingo. Next up is Dizzy. Role-wise, I feel like Archdemon Shadow covers Dizzy's role very good. And the fact that Archdemon Shadow's mechanic is just so good that it just kind of outshadows Dizzy, in my opinion. There's also a lot of counters to Dizzy, while Archdemon Shadow doesn't really have a lot of counters, so I feel like Dizzy is a solid C tier. She's still very good. There's also a couple of variation of her builds being the speed build or the counter build, or there are some DCs out there that are like 250 speed, 250 plus, and stuff like that. So yeah, C tier, she's good, but not that great. There are also a lot of cleansers in the meta. Also, Champion Zerato hard counters her. Also, the fact that Last Strider Crow exists, so Dizzy is in a rough spot, I would say. But at the end of the day, solid C tier unit. Next up is Dollmaker Horizon. D tier, Dominion. Just use Silverblade Aramenta if you want the 100% chance to stun. Doris, D tier. Ethan, Ethan. I feel like Ethan is really tanky and annoying. He has a built-in Aureus. He could hold Knight artifacts. C tier in my opinion. He has a good niche, I guess. He could be a good knight for you if you don't have the other premier knights in the meta. So yeah. Next up is Ida. I don't know what she does. Honestly. A lot of people overlooked her, and rightfully so. She's not that good in my opinion. She isn't that great, I feel like. And I feel like other people will agree to that. Next up is Elena. Now Elena, she has a niche, I would say. She has a solid niche. Like she provides invincibility and the effect resist buff. I mean, she gives 50% effect resist to everyone, including herself. But unfortunately, this meta is quite fast-paced. Elena as a unit doesn't provide that much offensive presence to the board, so I feel like C tier. She could be good against Cleave, so that's about it, I guess. Next up is Elfeld. Elfeld is a really good cleaver unit. I feel like B tier. Even after buffs, Elfeld is still quite niche, and she isn't still being seen a lot of play here and there. But overall, I guess solid unit. Arguably B or C tier. I'd think B tier because there are some cleavers that use her, so yeah. And the fact that she gives out defense break to everyone whenever she kills a unit. Also, 2-turn sleep is pretty strong, so I feel like rightfully B tier is good for Elf. She's good in cleave. She's a pretty good unit. Next up is Elson. Hopefully this guy doesn't go to your Moonlight pools. Enot. This guy, Ervelyn. Ervelyn? Honestly, D tier. Patricia is just the better single target nuker in my opinion. 100% defense penetration while also giving speed imprint is very huge and gives a lot of value, especially to cleavers, so yeah. Ervelyn D tier. Next up, Fairytale Tenebria. Easily S tier. Very difficult unit to face against. A lot of people still pre-ban her. Her debuffs are really annoying. Not even ambitious Tywin 100% counters her. She can be used anywhere. Bruiser, cleave, control. She's really good as a unit. So yeah. Rightfully S tier for Fairytale Tenebria. Next up is Faithless Ludica. Now, like I said earlier, she kind of fell out of the meta. Only certain cleaver players use her. But she's still really good, don't get me wrong. The fact that you can push up your team while also giving them skill nullifier is very, very huge. And the fact that she can hold Guiding Light, which means she can't be targeted by single target fast DPS units like A. Coley, Acid, and even ML Rin can't even target her. So I feel like solid A tier. She's still really good. She's still pretty good as a unit. Fallen off, yes, but still has a very solid kit. There are still some people who use her to a very good success. So. Next up is Falconer Chloe. Without a doubt, she's S tier. Also one of the best 3 stars in the game. Very free to play friendly unit while having a very strong kit. Defense break and provoke. 2 very good debuffs against the enemy team. The fact that her Soulburn can counter even the highest resist made Chloe's or DG based Bazaars out there. So yeah. Falconer is still a solid unit. One of the best 3 stars in the game. Flan got her buffs. The buffs that they gave her are really good. I feel like she's kind of a better-ish Oxlots, I would like to say. Or, I mean, obviously she's the better Tywin now. And also, arguably better than Oxlots in my opinion. But I feel like the problem with Flan is just, there's a lot of setup required. Like, you need strippers in order to make Flan work. But overall, if you could make her work, I'd give her a solid A tier. Still a very strong unit. Giving attack buff and crit damage buff on units is really scary, not gonna lie. The fact that she could also give souls for her team on her very own artifact is pretty good. Next up is Tierra. She's a great farmer if you don't have RV. Furious, one of the best defense breakers for Wyvern. General Pergis, one of the best Wyvern tanks, while also being really dominant in the competitive meta. His kit is really solid. There's also a couple ways you can build him. Very tanky, or the bruisery General Pergis. So yeah, he just provides a lot of value to the team. No other unit can do that. So his value is just so good that I'm rightfully deserving him on S tier. Good against cleave, good against bruisers. Provides a top up which is really dominant in the meta right now. So yeah, General Pergis is rightfully deserving of S tier. Next up, this guy, Glenn. From what I recall, Glenn, not even a good extinction unit in my opinion. Pretty mediocre. If you want to use the extinction unit, I feel like Lilibet is a little bit better. Okay, next up is Gloomy Rain. Now Gloomy Rain actually has a speed imprint. And the fact that she's kind of like a pseudo-ish Champion Zerato, I feel like C tier. She isn't great as a unit, but the fact that she has speed imprint just gives her value a little bit. So I think C tier. I'll put her at A, like the other speed imprint units that I give, like Watcher Shuri here and Celeste. But unfortunately, she has a pretty mediocre kit. But the fact that she has speed imprint is kind of her saving grace. So with that in mind, C tier for Gloomy Rain. Next up is Grandmother, D tier. Next up is Kawana, one of the best Arcadies units in the game. Next up is Gunther. Senya outshines her nowadays. Next up is Haste. He's still a meme. Hatan, pretty bad. Hazel, pretty bad. Helga, pretty bad. Now, Holiday Yufine, I don't really want to dive too much into the E7 World Cup because that's a different meta compared to the meta that we have right now. Since on the E7 World Championship, they have 2 pre-bans. The fact that having 4 pre-bans is very huge, which makes the meta a lot more different compared to ours. So there are a lot of uses being seen on Holiday Yufine since Bazaar is now really popular again. So I feel like Holiday Fiend has a very good niche. So I feel like B tier for Holiday Fiend. There are also a lot of variation when it comes to her builds. Like you can build her tanky, or you can build her the type that applies burn debuffs, or you could also build her as like a very YOLO-ish Holiday Fiend that does a lot of damage with very high attack and crit damage, and she would like demolish teams with her burst damage and the burn damage. So yeah, overall pretty good unit. Counters Bazaar. She's the best at countering Bazaar. Yeah, Corrado, just use Bazaar. Ian, I don't know what he does. Kind of a discount Faithless Ludica in my opinion. Ruzid. Ruzid has a good kit while having speed imprints. So with that in mind, I feel like B tier. A solid B tier. Violet. Unfortunately, Violet isn't that really good at the moment. I feel like C tier. If you could make him work, he's very scary when you make him work, but it's very hard to accomplish that. So I feel like C tier is a solid spot for him. Next up is Yekt. D. Next up is I forgot her name, but otherwise D tier. Judge Kisei. Feel like C tier. She's obviously still one of the best cleavers in the game, but unfortunately, I mean, like I said so many times now, cleave is just kind of niche at the moment. I mean, I am aware that Light got rank 1 by cleaving, but knowing Light, he has really insane gears. Overall, Judge Kisei is still a solid unit against him. Very scary when used in cleave teams, so I feel like C tier. Next is Judith. Judith has a really good base speed. Judith can hold Silver Rain, I think. Silver Rain is the name of the artifact that can give attack buff to the highest attack hero whenever they use a non-attack skill. Judith can hold that artifact, do her S3, give an attack buff to your cleaver. Judith as a unit is pretty good. Good base speed, good kit overall. C tier. Kana, one of the best green expedition units in the game. Karen, one of the best wyvern units in the game. Kawana, she has a niche, but very bad at that niche. Kaurik, I feel like C tier. I guess he's pretty good, I would say. Ken is still a meme, unlike his Moonlight counterpart. Next up is Ricardo. Ricardo sucks. His ML version though, on paper, his Moonlight version seems really strong, but at the moment he isn't released yet, and we don't know if he's gonna shake up the meta or be part of the meta of it. So who knows? But this Kawazu, D tier. This unit, Kikirat, I've seen some people try to make him work on counter set, but yeah, D tier. Curious, one of the best units on Abyss. Kitty Clarissa, she's pretty solid, I would say. She could hold Strack Gauntlet, so I feel like solid B tier. She could hold Strack Gauntlet, build her high effect resist. She could still be bulky. Also one of the best cleansers, obviously. B tier. I feel like she deserves B tier. Obviously there are other better cleansers out there, but yeah, I feel like solid B tier for Kitty Clarissa. Next up, Kizuna Ai. As a VTuber, she's really cute, but other than that, competitive wise on E7, D tier. Next up is Crow. One of the best knights out there at the moment. He pairs well with Carrot and does really great against Carrot users. Crow is Crow, you know. We all know him. We all got horsed by him. He could snipe someone. I don't think I need to go much further on him. We all know his strengths. This Flurry, you know, just move on. Landy, one of the best DPS units in the game, rightfully deserving of S tier. Very oppressive. Her hard counters are Carrot and Bazaar, but even then, Landy is just a very solid DPS unit. This Roth is D tier. Last Radic Crow. Ooh, this is kind of tough. Last Radic Crow, if this was the Golden Boy meta, S tier. I feel like he kind of fallen off a bit. He's obviously still really strong, but he isn't really that favored much anymore. Crow counters him, Blue Crow counters him because when Last Radic Crow rips his S3, Crow is pretty much almost at half health. And with that in mind, Crow could just snipe someone on your team and just have a bad day. So with that in mind, I feel like Crow is at the top of A tier, something like that. Last Radic Crow is still a very solid unit. The fact that he could ignore defense while also dishing out very huge chunks of damage to the enemy team. The fact that he is very tanky and can rotate pretty fast because of his speed buff on his S1, pretty huge. Barrier on his S2 whenever an AoE attack is also pretty big. So I feel like A tier is pretty justified for Last Radic Crow. Arguably S tier as well, but I feel like in the current meta, A tier. Next up is Lot's very good green expedition unit. As a unit on RTA, I feel like D tier. Yeah, I feel like giving him C tier, but nah. I feel like D tier. Lena, one of the best farmers in the game if you don't have RB or not in the mood to use Free Spirit Tierra, but yeah. Next up is Leo, one of the best Banshee units in the game. Ludica, niche. Next up is Lilius. While I do feel like Lilius still has a very strong kit, I feel like other knights are being more prioritized, and rightfully so, since the other knights are really strong. But I feel like Lilius is a solid A tier, still a very strong unit, pairs well with a lot of high attacking stat units like Arbiter Bildred, Dandies, and Carrot. She also has a lot of variety when it comes to her builds. Although high ER Lilius has fallen off, there are still some out there. There are also some crit damage Liliuses. There's also some pure tanky support Lilius, which is also really good builds. Overall, I feel like she deserves A tier. Kind of outshouted by some of the other knights, but she's a solid A tier, without a doubt. Next up is Lilibet. Lilibet has a strong multipliers. I feel like C tier. Next up is LQC. I feel like giving her S tier. She's a really strong unit. Yeah, I feel like S tier just deserves her. She's overall a very strong unit. To an extent, she could chip down carrots and landies on the splash damage. She's very good on Hellcutter. She also has some variety of when it comes to her builds. Like she could be like high crit chance crit damage, Sigurd size, or she could be like the standard Hellcutter, 150 speed Hellcutter, while having high attack and little crit damage, stuff like that. She also has innate protection, having reduced damage from crit damage, while also providing an adamant shield effect to our team, so there's that. Next up is Rowana. Since SSB isn't that popular in this meta, I feel like Rowana is still a solid B tier unit, so that's that. Next up, this little Lorena is D tier. Lucy, D tier. Ludwig, unfortunately, D tier. Blue Luluka, D tier. Luna, D tier. This Doris is actually very annoying to face against, but I feel like ranking wise, I would give her a solid B tier. She's more of a defensive Soul Weaver, but overall I'd say A or B tier. But I feel like since Landy exists, I feel like B tier is a solid option for Doris. Next up, Mascot Hazel, D tier. Fire Maya, B tier. Melissa, since Rylet isn't so popular right now, I feel like she's D tier, to be honest. I mean, she counters Rylet, but Rylet isn't popular and there are just more better counters to Rylet out there, like Lastra Crow, Little Green Charlotte, and Briar Witch Assyria. Mercedes, D tier. Helga, D tier. Next up is Mercer. The fact that she has a solid kit while having access to Speed Imprint, A tier, in my opinion. Also having access to Thief artifacts like Moonlight Dreamblade, making her much more annoying to face against. So yeah, solid A tier for Mercer. Next up is Misty Chain. Misty Chain, she's a good Wyvern Hunter. I used her before, but I got access to Sigrid. So yeah, there's that. Silver Blade Aramenta. Now in this one I would say just use Carrot, which kind of applies. I feel like Silverblade Armenta is in a bad spot right now. She's kind of niche. She's okay in control comps, but the fact that there are a lot of anti-control units out there, and just a lot of cleansers like Designer Littlebit, Desert Jewel Bazaar, Destina, and also the fact that she needs a stripper in order to make her kit work is just really bad. Rowana also kind of soft counters her. So yeah, I feel like C tier, very deserving of Silverblade Armenta. 100% AoE stun is very strong, don't get me wrong, but the fact that she requires just a lot of setup, and the fact that she gets countered by a lot of the cleanser units in this list, it just kind of hinders her a bit. So yeah, C tier for her. Fallen Cecilia, I feel like she's fallen off quite a bit because Crow is now more popular in terms of the premier knight being picked in the meta, but I feel like Fallen Cecilia is still solid S tier. The fact that she just gives a very huge barrier and just a lot of protection across the board, gives herself so much value compared to other knight units. Fallen Cecilia, rightfully deserving of S tier. She's really strong. She hasn't changed. The meta shifted quite a bit out of her favor, but she's still a very strong unit overall in my opinion. Next up, this Montmorency, D tier. Mort, he's a meme. Injury is a meme. We all know it. D tier. Mukaka, he's D tier. Mui is solid. I don't know what she does. I've seen her being picked. Yeah, at the moment she's kind of meh. Next up is Rima. Specialty change Rima, D tier. Nemonas, D tier. Next up is Operator Cigarette. Now, Operator Cigarette, from what I've seen so far, she's rising up in usage. She's one of the best units out there that can consistently kill a carrot. The fact that Carrot gives herself a barrier whenever she gets touched, and the fact that Operator Cigarette is pretty strong, the fact that she could counter a Carrot, she's arguably S or A tier. She also provides attack buff, which is really big in the meta right now. She's also a really good cleaver unit, so I feel like she's arguably A or S in my opinion. For now, I'd put her at A tier. She requires a bit of setup to make her work, but arguably still a very strong unit. She's really strong. Even against FCC comps in general, she's also really strong. Also, the pushback on her S3 is a nice bonus while also giving attack buff. Like again, I said attack buff. Pretty huge in the meta right now, so she's deserving of A or S. But for now, I guess I'd put her at A since she does require a team to make her shine. Next up is Ollie, D tier. Pavel is a really solid speed contester and a solid cleaver unit. With that in mind, I feel like B tier in my opinion. Next up, Horizon, D tier. Next up is Politis. I feel like Politis is a really good unit and deserves A tier. There's also a couple of variations of her builds being the damage Politis and the pure support effectiveness Politis. There's also a solid check against Maid Chloe's and other non-attack units alike like Falconer Clary, Diane. This unit is the reason why Cleave just dipped in usage. You're pretty much shooting yourself in the foot if you draft her against units that doesn't have a non-attacking skill. So yeah, you can draft her all the time. But when it comes to the right scenarios or the right situations, she's a really solid unit. Next up is Purgus. The fact that Landy and Rowan exist makes this guy a bad unit. But I feel like he's pretty scary when he pops off with his counters, but since Landy is really dominant in the meta, and the fact that Landy can't be countered on her S3, I feel like there are other more popular DPS users in the meta that makes Purgus quite irrelevant, which is quite unfortunate, but overall C tier for Purgus. Next up, Phyllis. He's alright, but D tier. Next up is Blaze Dingo. The fact that Politis exists as a unit just hinders him quite a bit while also having a pretty good niche. So it's also a solid cleaver if you will build him very DPS. C tier for Blaze Dingo. Fire Ravi. If this was the last meta, she's arguably S tier. But right now, she kind of fallen off. But she's still scary in her own right and can still and one of the units out there that can just 1v4 a whole team. So with that in mind, I feel like Ravi is A tier. She's still a really good unit. She's obviously fallen off, but she could still work. Fire Ravi is still Fire Ravi. Next up is Ray, also one of the best cleansers in the game, while also providing decent healing, so I feel like he deserves A tier. There are a lot of good Ray builds out there. Yeah, he's a really solid cleanser unit. Next is Remnant Violet. This guy fall off pretty hard. Now him as a unit, I feel like he's an A tier unit or maybe even B tier. It's kind of inconsistent. That's a problem with Remnant Violet these days. People are figuring out that he's pretty inconsistent. But with that in mind, I feel like Remnant Violet as a unit is still pretty strong. When RNG goes your way, he pops off really hard. Remnant Violet these days is a solid 5th or 4th pick maybe. Next up is Gloomy Rain. Gloomy Rain D tier. Now Ricorus, this Ricorus is B. This Rima is D. Rin, Landy exists. Next up is Roman. D tier. This Rosid is D tier. Rose is pretty good, I would say. A knight that can give AoE combat readiness push and AoE attack buff to everyone, which is really solid. Next up is Ruel of Light. I feel like Ruel is a solid A tier. She isn't that popular like Diane or Maid because those are more offensive units, while Ruel is more of a defensive Soul Weaver. The meta at the moment is now more fast-paced compared to the slower-paced seasons that Ruel shines in. Next up is Sage Ball and Suzanne. I feel like Sage Ball, pretty good unit, very cancerous to fight against. A good Sage Ball user is really scary to fight up against, and a really well-built Sage Ball is pretty scary. So with that in mind, I feel like A tier for this guy. Very scary S3. Also having a really good S2 that strips and also gives combat readiness when it isn't on cooldown. Next up is Fire Fury. The fact that he has a pretty good kit while having speed imprint, I'll give him an A tier. Next up, Maid Chloe. Maid Chloe easily S tier. She's one of the units that got buffed recently, and her buffs are really amazing. Really happy that they gave her a buff. She's now a very strong unit, can now cleanse out 2 debuffs while still providing attack buff and AoE revive onto the whole team. Her S2 now heals 2 targets. The fact that when she stuns someone, everyone gets pushed up. Very solid unit overall. Very aggressive Soul Weaver, which fits a lot of people's playstyle and really fits the meta at the moment. Solid S tier. Next up is Kisei. Kisei has popped up in popularity as of this season. Solid A tier. She's very scary. She could nuke out someone with her S3, especially when greater attack from Basque procs. So she's also one of the units that could counter Carrot alongside with Operator Cigarette. So she has that going for her. Kairon throughout the seasons, it just keeps falling off and falling off. There are a lot of strippers nowadays. There are a lot of units that could ignore his damage output. I feel like Kairon is still Kairon. He's still pretty good, I would say, especially against cleave teams. I feel like a solid B tier. Next up is SSB. SSB is still SSB. She's still a really strong unit, but unfortunately, she's very hard to pick nowadays due to the fact that Lacerada Crow and Rowan exist, and the fact that the meta is pretty high paced. I feel like SSB as a unit is an A tier, but at the current meta, she's B tier at the very least, in my opinion. It's really hard to draft her nowadays, but she's a really good unit on the very right scenarios, and also against the right draft. Next up is Sigrid, one of the best Wyvern units out there, and also one of the good Extinction units out there, but unfortunately, if you plan to make her as an Extinction unit against Maids or Arbiter Bildred, she's a C tier, she requires a lot of setup. Next up is Senya, one of the recent units out there. She has a very good niche. She kind of counters cleave, pairing really well with Lilius and other bruiser units. With that in mind, I feel like B tier. Next up is Booba, D tier. Says, if you want to do the Says Bomb nowadays, it's really hard. It needs a lot of setup for the Says Bomb to work. But overall, I think he's just too niche in my opinion. Next up is Shadow Rose, a very solid Banshee Hunter, but unfortunately doesn't really shine on the RTA setting. Next up is Shooting Star Arcadies. She has a gimmick. There are a lot of people out there who use her as a gimmick unit, and that in itself secures her a spot on C tier. If people can make her work in a gimmicky team, then she's pretty good. Next up is Silk, D tier. Soul Bad Guy. If she 100% counters Landy, he's really good, but he doesn't, so I feel like D tier. Next up is Solitaria of the Snow. Solitaria didn't really make a huge impact on the RTA scene. She counters focus based units a lot. She doesn't 100% counter RB because RB could still do his S3 even on revive. So I feel like Solitaria, solid B tier. She's pretty good. And that's about it. Pretty good. Next up is Sonia. Sonia or Anos. But regardless, she's B tier. Next up is Specimen Says. Specimen Says requires a lot of setup in order for you to use him to his maximum potential. And that in itself kind of hinders him. He did get a buff quite a while ago, but I feel like he's in a pretty bad spot. He also has a couple of variety when it comes to his builds. So overall, with that in mind, I feel like B tier. B tier for Specimen Says. Next up is Sirin. The fact that she has a speed imprint while having only a decent kit, so I feel like B tier for her. Next up is Ven. Just use Kairon. Even then, Kairon's pretty niche. Tamarin, the PvE goddess. Niche on PvP. Next up, the Taranor Guards. This one, very good Wyvern unit. This one, very terrible. Next up is Tempest Sirin. Also one of the better DPS units out there that is being used at the moment. Solid A tier for Tempest Sirin, in my opinion. Tempest Sirin, really good unit, really good kit. Has access to Moonlight Dreamblade and Lexus Basket, which makes her a very strong unit. Next up is Fire Tenebria. She's a really good expedition unit. Okay in PvP, I would like to say, on the lower brackets, but that's about it, pretty much. This tier is D tier. Top model Ludica. In my opinion, top model Ludica is pretty good at the meta right now, since Maid Chloe is so dominant. I use her quite a lot. I have a somewhat fast top model that has like 250 speed. She works pretty well against Maid Chloe's and Arbiter Bildred, so I feel like she's one of the best Extinction units out there. solid A tier. Troublemaker Rosette. Now this guy rise up in usage and just fell flat when LQC banner came in, which is quite funny in my opinion. But as a knight, he's one of the better knights out there. A tier suits him pretty well. Obviously, he's not one of the top picks anymore, unlike Crow or maybe even Pawn Cecilia. Tywin, just use Flan. Next up, Transmit Stones, D tier. Next is Green Vildred, A tier, solid A tier. Speed Imprint while being a very good cleaver and having access to thief artifacts, pretty good unit, A tier. Next up is Spectre Tenebria, one of the best DPS units as well in the current meta. The fact that she has a perma stealth on her S2, very strong. Also her lifesteal build rising in popularity, gives her self-sustain against carrots and even landies. Overall, Spectre Tenebria, very strong unit, especially on her lifesteal build. Next up is Vivian. Vivian, I feel like as a unit, Vivian kind of fell off. She's seen some play here and there on the past seasons, but arguably in this meta, she's pretty niche. If you give her a turn after her S3, she does a lot of damage. So I feel like B tier. Next up is this Wanda. This Wanda is D tier. Wanderer Silk, D tier as well. This guy, F tier if I have an F tier. Yufine, unfortunately D tier. Yuna, now I've seen a lot of people use Yuna to an extent where she is kind of successful. But at the moment, since Landy is so popular in the meta, I feel like Yuna is a solid B tier. There's also a lot of ways you can build a Yuna, like a speed offensive Yuna, speed and tanky-ish Yuna, counter Yuna. She also has a lot of access in terms of artifacts on the ranger artifacts, like Drink, Otherworld, the Machinery, Guiding Light, and stuff like that. So I say solid B tier. He's being experimented with at the moment by some players, so there's that. B tier for her. Next up is this Carmine Rose, is D tier. Zeno, F tier. This, F tier as well if I had one. The next one is the newest ML5 in the game. But at the moment, I feel like as a cleanser, he just pales in comparison against DJ Bazaar or even Destiny. I feel like he's okay, but obviously not the best. In terms of kit, he's okay. But is he the best at cleansing? Not really. Is he the best attack buffer in the game? No, not really. I feel like as a unit, his stats kind of hinder him. His kit is okay, but his stats and modifiers on his S2 is pretty weak. So I would say solid B tier for ML Carrick. Other units just outclass him in his role. Next up, last but not least, we have Ilinav, one of the newest units as well. She's kind of like Charles. I've seen a lot of people showcase her, but at the moment I feel like people are finding her underwhelming, and rightfully so, because injury is such a meme right now. She's C tier. She's inconsistent, to be honest. She suffers the same problem as Charles, having to rely on counter to proc or eldritch to proc. But she's pretty fun to play with from what I've heard. She's a solid Guild War unit, maybe Arena to some extent, but RTA wise, she's kind of pales in comparison to other knights, DPS knights out there. And that's it. This is pretty much a tier list. So what are your thoughts on this tier list? Making tiers is very hard. But at the end of the day, I hope I made a good tier list. Now remember, this is purely based on opinion and experience. So maybe there are some units that I didn't rightfully rank. Maybe some of these units I didn't rank them fairly. Maybe some of the units I maybe overrated them. Maybe some of the units I a bit underrated them. If I did, let me know in the comment section below. I'm open to opinions and other insights as well. But yeah, I feel like this tier list is really solid. If you guys enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate if you guys hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps me out a lot. That's pretty much, I'm pretty bad at outros, so I think I'm gonna end it here.